Hello students, and welcome to Chapter 3 and the Principles of Design. So in Chapter 2 we learned about the elements of art, and now we're going to learn about the principles of design, which go right along with the elements of art. So those principles are unity and variety, balance, emphasis and focal point, rhythm, scale, and proportion. And we have a quote here from Brian O'Doherty on Stuart Davis, the painter, and he says he searched disorder for its unifying principles. So what does that mean? Well, basically, a lot of times artists are looking for order. They're trying to bring order to chaos, which is an Egyptian thing, going back to Egyptian times. Sometimes artists are purposefully disordering things, and sometimes we're looking for unity. So we're going to see how all of those things play out. Oh, and I bet you'd like to see this in the full slideshow. So there we go. Yes, much better. All right, so design or composition. Design or composition is a process. It's the act of organizing the visual elements to affect a desired aesthetic on a work of art. And when artists create compositions, they are consciously drawing upon these design principles. And sometimes, however, as I mentioned, they may choose to consciously violate them. So we're going to look at examples of all of these things. The first being unity and variety. So unity is oneness or wholeness, as you might think, and a work of art achieves unity when its parts seem necessary to the composition. And there are ways to achieve unity and variety with unity. An artist might use a grid, and we'll see a couple of examples of how that might happen. Also using color harmony, for example, creating a monochromatic composition. Mono meaning one, chroma referring to color, so they are using maybe sticking to one color family, like sticking to all the reds or all the blues. That's one way. Or they might keep one or more aspects of the work constant, and also through continuity. So let's have a look. Oh, and also variety. Notice the use of color field for the sense of variety and unity. Notice a sense of oneness in the compositions we're about to see. Thus, there is a sense of variety, and I have no idea what your book's authors are trying to do with this slide, so I'm going to move on. Okay, so here we have, if you remember, Andy Warhol took lots of images of Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe's not the only person he did that with. This is a woman named Ethel Scull, and she was a probably one of his donors. She was a wealthy woman, and as it says, Ethel Scull 36 times. So if you look at this, what are the ways in which you're seeing unity and you're seeing variety? So unity, it's all the same lady. Variety, she's posing a little bit differently in each image, and of course there's lots of different colors on top of each of the images as well. So you've got both of those going for you here. And then this is a piece by African-American painter Archibald Motley called Saturday Night from 1936. It's oil on canvas. And what is the unifying principle in the design of this painting? And remember some of the things we talked about that can add to unity. So let's go back. So color harmony. So you can say here he used the color red in a monochromatic situation to create unity with this painting. And then this one's a little bit trickier. This is a painting by Thomas Hart Benton called Palisades, and basically he's talking about the colonization of North America here. You see there's some tribal people, there's some Spanish conquistador type people, there's a guy who looks like he's about to plant a flag. So if you look at this, remember back to talking about curvilinear lines. So if you look at all of these figures, they're sort of all curving towards the center of the painting. So that gives it a sense of unity. And then different types of unity. There's visual unity, so that is artwork that is unified by color, shape, composition, or some other visual design principle. And there's also conceptual unity, which is artwork that has a common theme or a concept throughout it. So here we have Emma Amos's Measuring. She's also an African-American artist, just like Archibald Motley, although she's a bit more modern. She's still alive. And this is a mixed media piece, which means she's taken more than one kind of media and put it together. So it's acrylic on canvas, it's African fabric, and she's also used laser transfer photographs, and she's also done some painting on it as well. Oh, that's the acrylic. So anyway, take a look at it. And what is being measured here? It's called measuring. So if you noticed that there is an African-looking female kind of in the middle, and then on the far right there is a Greek statue, and to the left is a female torso, which could be African American. It's dark, which kind of implies that. So what is being measured? Are they talking about concepts of beauty? The fact that they're using African fabrics along with an image of a woman from Africa makes us think maybe she's talking about the ways in which we measure beauty, whether that beauty is Western or non-Western. And then this piece is by Delilah Montoya, who is a photographer in California, and she likes to take pictures of groups of young people and a certain type of young people. So this has conceptual unity. So what sort of group do we see here? If you said a gang, you are correct. That's one of the things that Montoya likes to take pictures of, is young people in gangs. It's called Los Jóvenes. And what's unifying everybody here is the concept. They're a gang. They are together. And they're all kind of dressed similarly. They're sort of hanging together. You know, you have a sense that these people, well, they're in some kind of organization together. And then variety. So when artists emphasize variety, instead of looking for similarities, they are exaggerating the differences visually. So here we have Palmer Hayden's The Subway from 1930. It's nice and crowded. We can see things haven't really changed a whole lot since the 1930s. And here he is showing variety through the diversity of the different people who are on the subway. And then balance refers to the distribution of weight in art. And if we go back for a second to Emma Amos's piece here, looking at the Greek statue, that statue actually looks like it's leaning on one leg. In fact, all three figures look as though they do, and I'm going to talk about what that means in just a moment. So let's go back to balance. So balance can also refer to the actual or apparent weight in the elements of a composition. It might also have to do with balancing the formal elements of art. So the things in the picture like the color, the line, the way the space is used. So here is another Greek statue, a little bit different, but yet similar to the one we saw in the Emma Amos piece, where we have an athlete resting all of his weight on one foot. And this was sculpted by a guy named Polykleitos, and he was a Greek sculptor. He was interested in showing the perfection of the human body. This is why, and when we go back to Greco-Roman times, you see so many statues of naked athletes. They felt that the naked male body was, perfection, especially if it, had been honed through athletic prowess and so forth. And so Polykleitos devised something that we call a canon, which means it's a system, for creating the perfect portions in the human figure. And that would be called a canon of proportions. And then he's also credited with discovering contrapposto, which is also known as the weight shift principle. And basically what that refers to is an uneven distribution of weight resulting from placing all of one's weight on one foot. And one of the things about this, if you'll notice, for example, say you're watching the Oscars or the Grammys or some award ceremony where you have lots of young women who are coming down the red carpet and they're posing for the camera. Notice when they stop, they often turn to the side, rest all of their weight on one foot, and bend one knee. And that actually is supposed to give you the most beautiful silhouette, whether you are clothed or nude. So you'll notice a lot of the young ladies do that because they know that that will give a good shot from the paparazzi and will look good in magazines. So this was something that goes all the way back to Greek and Roman times of the best way to show off the human body. So this idea of the weight shift principle, also known by the Italian term of contrapposto. And you can have actual balance and pictorial balance. So actual balance means that the piece of art is literally balanced. It can stand upright on its own 2 feet. Pictorial balance refers to the distribution of the apparent or visual weight of the elements in works that are basically two-dimensional. So, a painting isn't going to stand up by itself, but it may have pictorial balance. And then I think you all know what symmetry is. Go back to that time when you were living at home and your parents had a sofa in the living room, and on one side of the sofa there was a table, and on the other side of the sofa there was a matching table, and then there was a lamp on one side and a matching lamp on the other side. You have symmetry. Refers to similarity of form or arrangement on either side of a dividing line or plane. It gives it symmetrical balance. The whole of the work has a symmetrical feeling. And then sometimes we may have asymmetrical balance, where the variations to the right and left side of the composition are more than slight, but there remains an overall sense of balance. And an artist may achieve that through using color or using shape, and we'll see the ways in which that works out. And then we also have a concept of bilateral symmetry, or pure or formal symmetry, in which everything in a composition to either side of an actual or imaginary line is exactly the same. So we're going to look at those. All right, so similar to Polykleitos, there was an ancient Roman who was named Vitruvius, and he came up with a canon of proportions. And what you're looking at here is the very famous Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci. And Leonardo was basically reading Vitruvius and took the idea of the human body inscribed in the circle and the square, and that all has to do with the body being perfectly symmetrical if you line it up in a circle or a square in a particular kind of way. So here's an example of perfect symmetry in the U.S. Capitol building, and it's meant to show on one side you have the building, part of the building where the House of Representatives would be, and on the other side where the Senate is, and it's meant to show that both sides are equally important. And as I said, asymmetrical balance is something artists will use as well. So that would be when the right and left sides of a composition bear visibly different shapes, colors, textures, other elements, and yet they're arranged or weighted in such a way that the artwork feels balanced. And human beings tend to like balance. So in works of art, often the symmetry is approximate rather than exact. And here we have a work by William Wegman. We'll see his work from time to time throughout the semester. He likes to work with his Weimaraner dogs, and he puts them in all of his works of art. So this is called Ethiopia. And here you can see there's definitely an approximate feeling of symmetry. You could also say he's got asymmetrical balance because it's balanced, although each part of the composition is a little bit different. And then in this piece, this is by Wu Jide. It's River of Dwellers, and this was a multi-block woodcut with water-soluble ink, and definitely asymmetrical, but the artist achieves balance through repeating the with sort of white blotches of color and little blotches, or white blotches and blue blotches and a few red and yellow blotches around the central part. Gives it a better sense of balance. And then this is a sculpture by Deborah Butterfield called Verde. And Deborah Butterfield loves doing sculptures of horses that are somewhat abstract. What's kind of cool about this is it's three-dimensional, but you can put it into a space, and the parts that she's left open are kind of filled in by the white of the wall, as you can see there. And, you know, the head and neck of the horse are balanced by the heaviness of the steel and the rest of the horse, because you've got the white of the wall coming through and your eye kind of fills it in. So now we'll talk about other kinds of balance. You can have horizontal balance when elements on the left and right side of the composition seem to be about equal. Vertical balance when the elements at the top and the bottom are in balance. Diagonal balance, where elements on either side of a diagonal line dividing the composition are visually equal. And then radial balance, where design elements radiate from the center point. And you most likely will see that in things like ceramic, jewelry, basketry, stained glass, and other crafts. And the example that we have here bears that out. So here is an example of horizontal balance with Gertrude Casebayer's photograph, Blessed Art Thou Among Women. And she was a photographer who liked taking pictures of mothers and daughters. And you can see how the darkness of the little girl's dress is echoed in the darkness of the woman's hair. And then here you could say, in some ways, I see both of these as having vertical and horizontal balance, in that, you know, the horizontal balance comes from, you could almost draw a dividing line down the center of the Gertrude Casebayer. And then with Case Sage, there's a vertical sense, but also a horizontal sense in that strange figure that comes up and kind of goes to the left. And then, as I said, artists also employ diagonal balance by establishing equal visual weight to either side of a pictorial space that is divided by means of a perceived diagonal. So this is a piece by Adele Jane called Two Heads, and you could sort of draw a dividing line diagonally from the upper right corner down to the lower left corner, in between the painted couple on the wall and the actual couple sitting on the bench. And then here we have a beautiful tabletop that was crafted of beautiful tiles from Iran. It's a mosaic, and it's an example of radial balance where the design elements are radiating from a central point. So imbalance also occurs too, and artists might use imbalance to purposefully create shock and discomfort, and they also might use it to capture a sense of movement. So here is Robert Capa's Death of a Loyalist Soldier. This was taken during the Spanish Civil War, and it's showing a man being shot pretty much the moment that he's dying. And if you can draw a line right down the center of this photograph, and it'll be completely different on both sides. And again, he's off balance. He himself is being knocked off balance, and it's an excellent piece of photojournalism because it is telling a story, a definite story that will go home to people and bring awareness to something happening in another part of the world. And then this is much more playful, a bit more fun. Niki de Saint Phalle is a sculptor, and she loves making these really beautiful, enormous statues of women. She calls them her Venuses. This is Black Venus, and she, has a little teeny tiny head, and she's got very big legs that she's sort of not perfectly balanced on, and it looks like she's about to, just throw that ball in the air and, go out and play. Okay, next principles of design are emphasis and focal point. So some feature of a work typically will capture a viewer's attention, and artists know that, so they will use emphasis, they'll emphasize that to purposefully focus the viewer's attention. And you might create a focal point in the following ways: by accentuating certain shapes, intensifying color, using directional line, strategically placing objects and images, or by isolating an object or a subject. So let's see how artists have done that. So here is Chuck Close's Lucas 2 from 1987, and what's it look like? Kind of looks like the guy has a whole kind of targeting the center of his head right between the eyes. That would be where the focal point is. And Close, basically what he does, we'll see some of his work in other parts of this semester. He will take a photograph of a person, a small photograph, and do a grid on that photograph. Then take a large canvas and do a proportionally the same but larger grid on the canvas and recreate the photo using a series of colors or splotches or things like that. So if you got up really, really close to this, that focal point would definitely go away because your eye would be looking at all the different colors and things that, have gone into making up this person's face. But when you back away, you can see very clearly that the focal point is right between his eyes. And then this is Pablo Picasso's Family of Saltimbanques. And this is an interesting one. So our eyes tend to gravitate towards the color red frequently. So you might say the large guy in the center wearing red is where your eye goes. But actually the focal point is meant to be the woman on the lower right part of the canvas who is by herself. And what's really interesting about this is there is kind of a story that can kind of go with this, whether it was intentional or not. Picasso, at this point in his life, had been with a woman for a long time, or not, I'm sorry, let me back up. He had not been with a woman. He had adopted a little girl, and she was, with him all the time and hung out with him. And this woman came into his life, and when that happened, she sent the little girl away. Picasso had no idea where she was, and none of his friends knew where she was. And this was a very rough time in Picasso's life. He felt very sad, and his friends distanced themselves, I think, from him and this woman. So I think that's what this painting is trying to get across. And then this piece here, this is much more designy and much less angst-filled. This is the Bauhaus Stairway by Oskar Schlemmer. And what do you think the artist is using to draw your attention? There's actually more than one thing. If you said the red of the woman's sweater, that is certainly one thing, but also notice the way that stairway is like pointing at the woman. You could say she's, not only is the red of her sweater pointing at her, but the stairs themselves are pointing at her, and the angles of her elbows are sort of echoing in mirror form what the stairway is doing. So there's a couple of different ways that Oskar Schlemmer is drawing your eye there. And then this one's kind of crazy looking, but this is called Welcome to the World Famous Brand by the Low Brothers. They are two Chinese brothers who are artists, and they create these collages of kind of Chinese and Western pop culture. So you've got like tons and tons of hamburgers and weird little babies and flowers and things, but the repetition on both sides of the piece kind of draws your eye into the center along with those yellow and red stripes. And then this one here is kind of a trick question. So this is Edgar Degas' Woman Leaning Near a Vase of Flowers. So where does your eye go when you look at this? Does it go to the woman? Does it go to the flowers? The flowers are overwhelming. They're almost overtaking her. And if you said the flowers, that's okay. Although as humans, we often look for other humans. So sometimes an artist will use a person in a work of art as the emphasis point or the focal point. Another of the principles is rhythm. You can have regular repetition or rhythm, orderly progressions. You most often hear about this in music, but rhythm can also be something that you find in art. So it can move you visually as well as emotionally. Repetitive pattern can be used to lead your eye over the landscape of a work of art. And rhythm is found in sound, nature, architecture, and art. So here is a piece by artist Magdalena Bakanowicz called Backs, which are made up of burlap and glue. And I believe that this was done as kind of another Holocaust survivors thing of showing the desolation of just these people who've kind of been robbed of their identities and their souls. And that's the back of it, and that's the photograph that actually appears in your book. But I thought it was interesting to show you a side view of this because, there really is nothing there but Backs. There really is a huge sense of emptiness with this work. But again, repeated over and over again, these Backs. And then this is the sanctuary of the mosque at Cordoba in Spain, and it's a huge mosque that was created in the 8th and 9th centuries. And well, you can see those arches, those beautiful red and white arches repeating over and over again. That gives you a definite sense of rhythm throughout the mosque. What's interesting, if you look at the columns at the bases of those arches, the columns are all a little bit different because when they were building the mosque, they were taking columns away from other works of architecture, so sometimes they're not necessarily the same kind of column that you see, but that, the arches are definitely a beautiful repetition. And then scale is another way that artists use the principles of design. It refers to size, and scale is the relative size of an object to other objects of its kind, its setting, or human dimensions. So here we have another word piece by Barbara Kruger, Power, Pleasure, Desire, Disgust, where she has made the words humongous. They're huge, they're overwhelming, and it's meant to overwhelm you. And she's doing that with scale. And then this sometimes, this is actually an example of a photojournalist using scale to show the size of a hippopotamus. In 1852, when this was taken, a lot of people had never actually seen a hippopotamus, and the hippopotamus here was a gift to Queen Victoria. I forget from whom, from another country, and it was brought to the Zoological Gardens in England at Regent's Park. And Count de Montezon took a picture of it with people in the image so that people reading the newspaper would get an idea of just how big a hippopotamus is. And then sometimes artists use hierarchical scaling, which is a way of indicating importance, and we see this especially excuse me, I've got a cough drop. We see this especially in Egyptian art, where you'll see images of the pharaoh, and he's huge and everybody else is really small. And it's just a way of letting you know the pharaoh is the most important person. So the bigger, the more important. We see this in ancient art. We also see it in medieval art, and people use it to this day as well. So here we have on the left, family portrait by Viola Fry, and you can see it kind of looks like the father figure in the center. He's the biggest. He must be the most important. It reminds me too of Egyptian tombs where sometimes when someone would die, they might have children, and their children might have been full grown, but in the tomb, the children are always shown as teeny tiny, whereas the tomb owner is shown as enormous. And again, that's because, well, they're the most important person. They're the one that's buried there. And then on the right, we have a painting by Frida Kahlo, the Mexican painter. This is called Frida y Diego. And if you remember, Frida was married to Diego Rivera. And what's interesting is in modern times, Frida is actually much more well-known and much more popular than Diego is. But back in the day, Diego was a very important Mexican muralist painter. He painted these huge, huge murals depicting Mexican history, Mexican politics, and so forth. And Frida felt, she painted that herself, and she felt that he was the more important of the two of them. And actually, physically, he was much bigger than she was, too. If you see pictures of them, he was massive and she was tiny. And then sometimes artists will subvert the idea of size. So this is by the artist Rene Magritte. And I know some of you have said you really like the Surrealists and you love Salvador Dali. So Rene Magritte is one of the Surrealists. And surreal, again, comes from the French word super real, and they like to take real objects and place them in ways that, you wouldn't ordinarily see them. So you can see he's put a sky on the walls of a room, what might be a pill in front of a wardrobe that has a giant brush on top of it, like a blush brush, and a giant comb on a little tiny bed, and then a huge matchstick and a huge glass. And it's called personal values. So looking at that, you might kind of infer what was important to that particular person. So distortion of scale. So sometimes a sense of scale will be distorted in order to create visual shock, sometimes humor, and it can also challenge the viewer to rethink the subject and the historical aspects of the object. So here, I mentioned in medieval art, they also used scale, and this is Jan van Eyck's Madonna in the Church, and one of the other things that they often did in medieval times is they linked the body of Mary, the Madonna, with the body of the church. And so here they've placed a giant Mary in the church and made her as larger than the arches. And then on the right, you can see Giovanni Paolo Panini's The Interior of the Pantheon, which is actually a building from Greco-Roman times. It got made into a church, and you can see the little tiny people in it, just showing you, the massiveness of the Pantheon. And then this is a definite distortion of scale. If you've ever had a child, you might feel that that child takes over your life completely. And this is called Baby Girl. It was done by an artist named Marisol. And actually, it's a self-portrait. That little teeny woman sitting on the doll's leg is Marisol herself. I don't know if Marisol was making her own commentary about motherhood there, but here the distortion of scale certainly implies that there's some kind of, commenting about motherhood being made here. And then we're going to do a closer look at Claes Oldenburg. Claes Oldenburg is a sculptor who likes to take everyday objects and make them really huge. So what you're going to be looking at here is something that might be familiar to a lot of you. If you take the subway or the L and you go through Suburban Square or Suburban Station, you might see this clothespin. I think it's been cleaned up since this picture was taken. It was really rusty at the time that this picture was taken. It's 45 feet high, and so Claes Oldenburg has basically taken something small and made it huge. And part of this was done for Philadelphia's bicentennial in '76. And it was also done to symbolize Philadelphia as the city of brotherly love, the clothespin holding everybody together. And so now we're going to look at a couple different things. Proportion. So the canon of proportions I mentioned earlier, that was something that Polykletos used. It's something that other artists have used, one that was either established by somebody that in the time in which they were living. Da Vinci certainly followed one and created one. And then there's also the golden mean, the golden rectangle, and the root 5 rectangle. Now, if you're like into math and geometry, these things may mean more to you. And I understand how artists use them. I'm just so not a math person, but I'm going to do my best to talk about this. So what they are, the canon of proportions are a set of rules about the body parts and their dimensions relative to one another that became the standard for creating the ideal figure. So for example, this I can talk about easily. Leonardo da Vinci said that a human body was generally made up, if you took a person's head and then multiplied it by, 7, you would basically have their height. So that is part of kind of his canon of proportions. That's part of it. So the golden mean or the golden section refers to the small part of a work should relate to a larger part of the work as the larger part relates to the whole. So the small part of the work relates to a larger part of the work, and then as the larger part relates to the whole. And then the golden rectangle is a rectangle based on the measurements of the golden rectangle. So here we have a golden rectangle, which is in pink. Its longer side is A, and its shorter side is B. And when placed next to a square, adjacent to a square with sides the length of A, will produce a similar golden rectangle with longer side A plus B and the shorter side A. So if you didn't get that, don't worry about it, but that's what that is. So now we're going to look at the Parthenon, which is a Greek temple, and the Greeks were obsessed with proportion, not just in their statues of athletes, but also in their buildings. So here is the Parthenon, which was a temple, and it is superimposed with the root 5 rectangle. And the gable would have been sitting on the top of the temple there, on top of, the area that looks like it's all broken up. So if we don't consider that, the facade of the Parthenon is a root 5 rectangle. And then Michelangelo also used the root 5 rectangle if you can consider the that line, that half circle, and the diagonal drawn. Imagine it drawn through here. You can see it in how he created his composition for the fall of man and the expulsion from the Garden of Eden that appears on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And then sometimes an artist will violate the canon only for expressive purposes. So this is Alice Neal's The Family, and every single one of her portraits looks like this. So they have great big heads and sometimes giant hands or teeny feet, or teeny feet and giant hands. Generally the heads are outsized. People were really, really crazy about her in the 70s. I'm not sure I'd want her painting my family, but that is what she did. So I'm stopping here. This is the end of chapter 3, and I hope that y'all have a good week, and see you again soon. Once I figure out how to turn this off. All right, see you again soon.